I've been thinking about devotion lately. And it's a funny thing because to the Western mind, we see it as something mushy in comparison to the intellect. And in terms of yoga and the yogic paths, or to say it plainly, the roots to union, and that's what yoga means, union. And the roots there, the various kinds of practices, and there are many, emphasize the intellect or the path of the heart called devotion. They're all legitimate roots because all work to open the doors to that tranquil field that we experience when we meditate, that we sometimes get brief and fleeting flashes of. But to the Western mind, often bhakti, or the devotional path, seems mushy or seems less credible than activities having to do with the intellect. And that's a funny thing because there seems to be something biological within us that needs to surrender to something bigger. And yet psychology texts rarely mention this as a legitimate need or as a veritable kind of practice or route toward even sanity. Forget union with the divine. Let's bring it down a couple of notches. Even as a route to sanity, devotion is scarcely recognized in all of the leading self-help manuals and psychology texts. And yet there seems to be a genuine need within us to relate to something that goes beyond what our mind can comprehend, beyond the limitations of this thing we call the intellect. And it's a funny thing because when we talk about these yogic paths, we use the word practice. And I'm always referencing one of my favorite female teachers, Carolyn Mace. She doesn't like the word practice. And I can see why, because it conjures up this notion of sports. You've got to practice, or you've got to practice riding your horse, or you've got to practice playing the guitar. When really a yogic path or a spiritual practice is so much more than doing something every day to get good at it. It's giving us a taste of the sacred. It's giving us a glimpse of the holy. And other kinds of activities are other kinds of activities, and that's what makes yoga such a special and exalted thing. It pierces the walls of the intellect by giving us just a taste, a glimmer, a fleeting glimpse of the holy, the sacred. That's why she doesn't like the word practice. It doesn't convey this sense of something so precious, something so beyond words, something so beyond what the intellect can even conceive of or make sense out of. And there's something within us that's healed by this taste of the holy. It's a moment where fears subside. And it's a funny thing because we like to be devoted to things. Somehow, on some level, we understand the purpose and the role of devotion, but we have surrogates. We're devoted to political parties, we're devoted to sports teams, we're devoted to other people, we're devoted to activities, we're devoted to hobbies. But at some point, we realize the weakness of these things in their lack of ability to truly fulfill on a soul level, on a profound level, to deliver meaning in a deep way, not a superficial way. So we are looking for answers, but the paradox is that the answers we get through devotion aren't answers in the traditional sense. It's an answer in the sense that the very activity itself, the very act of surrendering, the very opening of the heart space is itself a delivery, is itself satisfying and fulfilling. And it conveys meaning of the most profound kind, not in a superficial sense, in a way that allows us to taste something greater, in a way that allows us to experience that when we direct our mind to God, toward the holy, toward the sacred, toward the divine, toward the infinite, then our fears melt away. They simply can't live in the same domain, in the same house, in the same field of awareness. And it's at that moment that we realize, by devoting ourselves to something greater, the ego games fade away, the fears fade away, they dissolve, they can't live together. And in that way, we feel satisfied in a way that the other surrogates couldn't satisfy or fulfill. And so today's set, I've taught it before, not too often, it's very special. It's actually 2 little mini sets. It will involve bowing, and I'm always talking about the value of bowing and what a significant, even day-to-day activity it is in the East. And here we think of it as kind of weakness. You know, we're not used to dropping our heads down low, but in fact there's a great strength in the act of bowing, in the act of putting our head before our heart, and in the gesture, the physical gesture of laying down those ego games. We gain a kind of strength that is anything but weakness. It's triumphant, it's victorious. It's the kind of inner strength that you can't buy in the stores or get from the devotion to political parties or sports teams or whatever. It's the kind of strength that is enduring and abiding. And so the act of bowing gives us that kind of strength and connection. And that's why we do yoga, to connect to something bigger. So we'll start with a series of bowing. And this set was given, I always find this so interesting. Yogi Bhajan first taught this set in 1971. So this was 2 years after he came to the United States, and he introduced bowing to a Western group of students that weren't used to such things because it's not part of our culture. So we'll do this series of bows, and then we'll get into a set that will open up our heart space to that devotional aspect that we call bhakti in yoga. So let's start by coming onto our knees, if you can, and if you can't, just stay in easy pose. It's okay to modify as needed.